Good morning. This is Steve Hoffaker. Welcome to another one of our professional development programs. This morning's program, Linda Kafka, who is a CAPS and a WELL AP, and a couple of other designations she'll tell you about in a moment, is doing our program on some emotions and how they factor into aging in place. And Linda's got a lot of good things to share with you. So we'll turn it over to you, Linda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've been in the industry since 2006, and more specifically in 2009, I was actually hired in Toronto, Canada, to repurpose a building that was traditionally it was in the furniture industry. Really dealt with dealers or our retailers would purchase from the building, from the various showrooms. And it started because of the 2008 recession. They started finding that a lot of the tenants were moving out, or the traffic wasn't coming into the building. And so what happened in my role was I turned it into a design center. And really the premise of it was about education, bringing education. And back in 2008, 2009, we were looking at things like LEED. And all of you are familiar with LEED and, and how the building sustainability and the environment and the impact and so on. But it was 2010 that I started hearing about the aging in place and the CAPS programming. And so I really pivoted towards a lot of education, myself included, in aging in place. And then shortly after that, I started to really look at not just how we've moved through our space. And I know you may argue with me on this topic, but I just want to really bring it down to the most basic. When we talk about aging in place, at the ultimate, most basic, regardless of independence and security and safety and all the things that we learn, it's really truly about how we maneuver through our spaces, how we get into the spaces, whether it's horizontal maneuvering, vertical maneuvering up and down. It also includes that reach and range and so on. And so after I finished looking at the aging in place and how we addressed the built environment, I started to move towards WELL building standards. And even though it's a commercial-based program, the reason why I looked at it was it dealt with the human being and our 11 body functions and how things like acoustics affect our nervous system or our body in general. We looked at indoor air quality, and we looked at the off-gassing and the VOCs, things that we talk about in the CAPS program and in aging in place. And we looked at lighting and all the different aspects of how all of these things in the built environment affect our body systems. After that training, I moved into something really interesting, and this is what today's talk is going to be about. It was neuroaesthetics. It was about how we emotionally feel and connect to our spaces, because you can design a fantastic aging in place environment that allows that individual, their independence, their security, their safety, their ease of use and comfort. They can live a life within that space. But if they don't emotionally connect to it, what ends up happening is that their stress levels increase, their their cortisol increases, which is, your stress hormones. And so you're constantly in that fight, flight, freeze type of environment, and you don't know why. And it could be things as simple as the colors that you've chosen in there, the detailing that you've put in there. As humans and human biology, and it's something that I really want to encourage all of you to start to look at, is we have a relationship with our space and we become a unit with our space or our environment. And so it's really important to not just look at the physical way we move through our space, but the physiological effects of how our space affects us. So I'm going to start this PowerPoint. Just give me a second here as I set myself up for it. Start from beginning and share my screen. By now, I should be a real expert at doing all of this.
There we go.
Start from beginning. Can you all see that?
You're good. Keep going.
So I really want you to, as you move through your career offering your aging in place services, I really want you to start to think about how our emotions and how our space make us feel and how we connect with that. And a lot of times we often think that we are doing that. But if you start to really look at human biology and the reasons why, and why we need to do certain things, you'll have a lot of more aha moments in terms of of our connection, our emotional connection to space. So I want to welcome you to the exploration of really of a profound impact that our living spaces have on our emotional health and our emotional well-being. So in this presentation, I'm going to really dive into the concept of feeling home. And it's an understanding that goes beyond the physical structure of our residences, and it really investigates the emotional and the physiological characteristics that our homes can evoke. Now, in this presentation, I'm going to unravel some of the significance of creating homes that not just focus on healthy environments, but also nurture our feelings and a sense of comfort, security, and belonging. So just quickly, just to give you an overview, we're going to look at who, we are who we were. We're going to look at the feeling of home. Form follows feeling. Now, if you're a designer, you would have studied how form follows function. Works very well in aging in place, but now we're moving towards how form follows feeling. I'm going to look at the future of medicine is in the home, nature indoors, why we sleep, and eliciting a pleasure and minimizing a stress or stressors, stimulating the brain. So to really drive the point home, I'm going to share some quotes that are coming out. And these are not necessarily new quotes, but they've been around for a couple of years. But they're important for you to know because it's not just us that's talking about it. There's a whole industry, various industries out there that are really talking about our environments and how they make us feel. And so Suchi Reddy, who is a neuroaesthetic architect, she believes that form, of course, has to follow function, but form following feeling means that architecture is much more embedded in our DNA. Now, that's really interesting to have an architect talk about what's embedded in our DNA. What does she know that we don't know? Let's look at the doctor. This is Dr. Claudia Miller at the University of Texas, and she says that architects and designers have a greater ability to improve public health than medical professionals. Now, I know on this call, there aren't a lot of architects. There's probably no architects on this call. And designers, yes, I'm sure there are designers, or all of you are engaged in design, but don't look at this as just strictly architects and designers. Look at anybody that works in the built environment and that has an influence in terms of what that environment looks like for those individuals. So to her point is that we're being more proactive as opposed to medical professionals that are reactive. I love this researcher. If you don't know her, you should. She's got a great book out called Your Brain on Art, Why the Arts Transform Us. She is the executive director of the International Arts and Minds Lab at Johns Hopkins. And this is what her research and her constituents talk about. She states, and this is Susan McSalmon, our brains and bodies are always sensing and interpreting the world around us. And we know that the design of spaces impacts our biology. The opportunity to use this knowledge to design and create intentional spaces that support our health and well-being, that's the future of design. So we need to look at this and incorporate this into our aging in place design. It's not them versus us, young versus old. It's about all of us. It's about designing for the human being. So I want to take you on a little trip, a little journey. It's an evolutionary journey. We're going to go back 10,000, 40,000, 300,000 years ago. This is, when the Homo sapiens first roamed the earth. And the reason I'm taking you back is because what our ancestors had in their DNA and what they were surrounded with carries with us today in our own DNA. So I want to say, welcome home. This is where we lived. This is where we raised our children and where we hunted and where we gathered to survive. And we didn't wake up to the sounds of alarms or your iPhone. We woke up only to the sounds of wind, nature, birds, chirping, sunlight peering through the leaves. The ground was covered in moss, clean smell, pine trees. This was the original aesthetic beauty that surrounded us. And this is what we carry in our DNA. There were no skyscrapers, no brick walls, no cars, no computers. This is what shaped us. That's really important. This is what shaped us. This is what our brains, our ancient brains adapted to. And we still carry an ancient brain or have an ancient brain. Our views were distance. So think for a minute, how often can you look across the street and not really see further than the buildings? Our evolution in nature sculpted our senses, our instinct, our intellect, and we honed skills to navigate those forests, those plains, those rivers. That's right. And of course, the famous savanna. And this is where we lived, where we adapted, where we filled our lives with aesthetic beauty. This was our habitat, a habitat that nurtured us, leaving an indelible mark on our DNA. Now, as an exclamation point to what I've just kind of mentioned, Nigel Nicholson, who is a well-known psychologist and a scholar in the UK, says, you can take the person out of the Stone Age, but you can't take the Stone Age out of the person. We are who we were. Hard to believe, but we are. We carry this DNA in us. But here's the problem. This is where we live today. There's nothing human-centric about this. Now remember, our DNA is still needed, it still needs aesthetic beauty. And we still run on a DNA that was developed hundreds of thousands of years ago. Look at those harsh visual interruptions. So what's human-centric about a bunch of boxes? Now, if you're familiar, or some of you may not be familiar with Carl Sandburg, but in 1957, he wrote, "We live in the time of the colossal upright oblong." Now, this Carl Sandburg was a man of many words, but he couldn't find words that were warm and supportive to describe the environments that we live in. And this isn't just, again, relating to younger people or middle-aged people. This relates to every single person that lives in this type of environment. You know, this is how we live. The car is efficient as it is. It really seals us off from our connection to the natural and aesthetic world. And, you know, I hope that you kind of have an idea of where I'm going with this. Now, here's the question. If aesthetic experiences are required as a result of our DNA and our evolutionary inheritance, what have we done to ourselves in the last century? It really is difficult to measure the negative impact on our emotions and our physiological responses, but science and scientific research tells us that the opposite of this visual, the opposite being aesthetic beauty, what your industry designing and building and creating environments, that's what we need. Now, again, not necessarily specific to seniors. This is more generic to the population. But by 2050, it's forecasted that 7 to 10 people will live in cities. And this trend is expected to continue. We're going to see a whole, it's not just within America, but we're going to see this in every city across the country, across the globe. Now, why is this information relevant? You're probably asking yourself, why am I listening to all of this? Now, what I'm trying to do here is give you a perspective just in a few slides on just how important human biology is. And I want to establish the important role that you, as you design spaces for aging in place, you know, how you design those places, how people live in those places, how people thrive in those places are really important. But to understand that, you need to understand, you know, who we are and how our modern environments really do affect us. Now, keep in mind, I'm a marketing professional. I don't create aesthetic beauty in spaces. I don't design spaces, but you do. And now providing nature and beauty is not just a design process or a strategy. It's becoming within the industry as a whole a responsibility for design professionals. And that even includes those that work as builders too. We're starting to see this whole migration to really understanding how important our environments are. Now, I'm going to share a quote. He happens to be based in Waterloo, Canada. But I thought this was really relevant because many of you will understand this, that there's a lot of science in ensuring that a building doesn't fall down or a home doesn't fall down. And there are certain basic principles of physics that you have to follow. Now, Colin Elliott says that the same thing would apply to human science. There are certain underlying principles of human biology and neuroscience that suggest how we ought to build and design. And just as a side note, what's happening right now is especially in architecture, we're starting to see the word neuroarchitecture. In design, we're seeing the word neurodesign. And it really is about how our brains are reacting to those spaces, not how we physically move through those spaces, how, you know, and we learn a lot through aging in place, but how we respond to those spaces. And so we are right now in the century of biology, and we're starting to really understand and look at the human being as a whole individual, not necessarily by an age category, but by how we respond to our spaces. And so it's time that we start looking at how we're designing those spaces for humans. Now, what's also happening out there at the same time is this whole wellness real estate. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, but it's growing. It's right now currently a $398 billion industry. Now, I'm just going to share with you the overall value, or the overall global industry economy, because it's far surpasses the billion. It's actually in the trillions of business. And so what we're seeing is all these different sectors, whether it's personal care products, beauty products, physical activity, our eating, our mental wellness, our tourism, they all fall under this global wellness economy. And you can see there that purple circle, is specific to us. That is our industry, our built environment industry, our homes, our multi-units, our retirement homes, our education facilities, our healthcare facilities, and so on. So what we're seeing is a real investment in the well-being. And now you are all probably familiar that, our homes and our communities and our surrounding environments, they all directly affect our daily behaviors and our lifestyle. But did you know that together they really determine 80 to 90% of our health outcomes? Now, since our homes are typically our most important personal investment and expenditure, it's only logical that they should be an investment in our health and well-being. So it's not just about how we move through those spaces, but how does it actually support our health and our well-being? And mental health is really important. Now, Dr. Douglas Wood of the Mayo Clinic, he claims that the future of medicine is in the home. So again, we're looking to be proactive as opposed to being reactive. Why? Because design and what you do can actually aid in prevention, and sometimes it can cure. Now, notice that this isn't a local chiropractor that's saying this, but this is the Mayo Clinic. And so these are really important because you've got, like I said earlier, the architect, the researcher, the doctor. You see here the Mayo Clinic. They're all talking about how important those environments are for us. And we need to pay more attention into not just when we design spaces, not just looking at how we physically move through them, but how they actually emotionally connect to us. It's important that we understand the significance of form follows feeling. Now, our home design plays a significant role in influencing our emotional well-being, directly impacting the production of our happy hormones in our bodies. So for those of you that are not familiar, our happy hormones are our serotonin, our dopamine, our oxytocin. They are neurotransmitters, commonly referred to as happy hormones, and they contribute to feelings of happiness, pleasure, and contentment. So again, as I mentioned earlier, you can create an environment that people are safe and secure in and have ease of use and have comfort, but how do they emotionally connect to that? And so that needs to be part of what we do as aging in place professionals. Now, when our living spaces are designed to evoke positive emotions, such as the comfort and the joy and security, it stimulates that release of these happy hormones, promoting overall happiness and well-being. And what happens when you're happier? The stress reduction happens, and longevity, there's an opportunity for longevity. Now, home design plays a significant role in influencing our emotions. And while this principle holds relevance in many sectors, it's particularly significant for our homes. Unlike other spaces, our homes serve as backdrop to our most intimate moments and are profoundly influence our daily lives. And therefore, ensuring that our lives and our environments evoke positive emotions and feelings is really paramount. And so it's important that we start to embrace that whole concept of form follows feeling in home design, so we can create spaces that not only fulfill practical needs, because that's what we're doing right now for aging in place, but also nourish our emotional and our physiological well-being. And overall, and ultimately, it really does enhance our overall quality of life. Now, within the confines of our home, there exists a delicate balance between experiences of pleasure and instances of discomfort. And this dichotomy arises from various factors, including the design, the organization, the functionality of our living space. It could also encompass other things like, including the colors of our spaces, the textures, the patterning, a lot of complexity and detailed complexity within our spaces, the fractal patterning in our spaces. So they all actually impact and either are going to comfort us or add pleasure instances or pain instances. Now, we're all familiar with these kinds of situations, the bottom ones. But, certainly there are aspects of our home that bring us immense joy and satisfaction. Those cozy nooks bathed in natural sunlight, the views to outside, something that we often overlook, especially people that are in wheelchairs. And I'll give you an example. My mom, now this happened to be a retirement home that she was in, an older retirement home, but it also relates to a lot of older homes that were built in the 1950s, where the windows and the windowsills are so much higher. And when somebody's sitting in a wheelchair, they don't actually get to see the complete views of outside. They often only get to see, perhaps maybe the sky or the tops of trees and so on. So important because that creates pain as versus pleasure within that space. So it's understanding and navigating the interplay between the pleasure and and pain is essential in creating a home environment that prioritizes our emotional well-being. Now, emotions serve as that foundation upon which our experiences are built. They influence every aspect of our lives, including the spaces we inhabit. And in the context of home design, understanding the intricacies of human emotion, that's what you need to focus on. How do people feel within that space? Once you've created that space, that aging in place home, how do people feel within that? And they should really be more than just functional shelters. They should really be an extension of ourselves, and they should really reflect our personalities, our values, and our aspirations. So important part of your discovery process when you're meeting with that client for the first time is really trying to pull a lot of that information out so you can incorporate it into the design or the renovation that you're working on. By prioritizing the emotional aspect of design, we can create living environments that really do resonate with our deepest desires and evoke that sense of joy. Whether it's through the use of color, like I said earlier, or texture or spatial layout, and art plays an important role. Even pieces that elicit storytelling, really important to incorporate those into the space. Now, I know many of you are probably renovators and you're going to say, I don't have that aspect to be able to do that. But if you are working with a designer, or if the homeowner is so inclined to want, or their adult children so inclined to want to know about that, there's no reason why you can't talk about it. It doesn't always have to be just about the, zero threshold bathroom shower that you're creating, or that's the zero step entry that you're creating into a home. You can extend and express this as part of the discussion that you're having. It's going to set you apart from other renovators or other designers that are working in the same field. And by the way, as I said to you, I started this in 2010. Here we are 14 years later, and I am starting to get so many phone calls from designers that are saying, hey, you know what, I think I need to be trained in aging in place. So the competitiveness is going to continue to grow. You're going to see a lot more people in there. So what's distinguishing you differently than the rest of the audience or the rest of the industry that's out there? So when we look at these, environments that are going to elicit pleasure and minimize stress, what you're really doing is you're tapping into the DNA, you're tapping into a genetic programming as humans, and it's deeply rooted in our evolutionary history. Now, through millennia, our ancestors sought out environments that provided all the things that we talk about: the safety, the comfort, the nourishment, while avoiding those that posed threats and caused distress. And as a result, and this is important for you to understand, that our brains are wired to respond positively to environments that evoke feelings of pleasure and tranquility and well-being. This is part of who we are. Remember when I took you on that journey back to where we were 10,000, 40,000, 300,000 years ago, where we evolved from? Think about the entire evolution history of the human and where we are today in modern world. It's not even a drop in the bucket. Our modern world in comparison to what we've gone through in terms of our genetic programming. So it's really important because basically our brains have been developed, over thousands of years to really avoid pain and seek pleasure. And so that's what you've got to create when you're creating environments. You want to really minimize that stress, not just on how we move through it, but how do we feel once we're sitting in that space? So the transformative power of infusing beauty into our living spaces, it's not just about aesthetics. It's about creating an environment that truly resonates with that individual on a more deeper level. It's inspired, it's uplifting. It can create so many kinds of emotions. Now, what we're all looking at right now in the design industry and the architect industry is we're looking at the therapeutic benefits of connecting with nature. And so a lot of people are looking at, and if you're not familiar with biophilia, it's really our human love for nature, our innate connection to nature. Again, going back 10,000, 40,000, 300,000 years ago when I first showed you, it's that connection that we all have with nature. And it's not wishful thinking. This whole idea of biophilia and connecting us to nature. This is really immensely therapeutic, and it has a great potential. And what I want to point out here, it's not about putting a plant in a room. Something is just seeing visible wood grain reduces your blood pressure by 5 beats per minute. Having views to outside, creating that nook, that prospect and refuge, is one of the patterns and principles of biophilic design. Now, if you're not familiar, I'm going to just suggest that you Google Terrapin Bright Green. They've got fantastic downloadable PDFs on the different principles and what you can incorporate into the space. But things like the shape, the roundedness, the curves. Again, remember, coming from nature as human beings, nature rarely has right angles. So it's unfortunately the built environment has to have right angles in it, but the accessories or certain elements that you create can add texture, can add softness to those spaces. So I want you to think about that when you're renovating these environments, is to really think about softening them up and how can we create those biophilic elements and bring them more of that nature indoors. Again, could be through the views, it could be through colors, it could be through textures, but more that natural type of feeling within the space. So we all know this building, and biophilia is really about that return to our roots and a return to nature. And it's about that. It's also a fascinating tool that you can really use, or your clients can tap into, to really improve their health and well-being. The theory of it states that because we spent so much of our evolutionary history in nature, we have an innate love of nature and natural surroundings, and we're linked to nature physically, cognitively, and emotionally. So that's really important. We are linked to nature physically, cognitively, and emotionally. So we aren't just in nature, but we are nature. We are part of nature. So when you're designing and renovating those spaces, keep that in mind and look for ways to be able to incorporate things. And like I said, Terrapin Bright Green, download it, and you'll find out how to incorporate nature into the environment. This is where, again, where we lived in urban centers, we were really deprived of nature, and it's going to continue as the population increases, as we build more and more. Now, I want to share this with you, and I'm sure, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this study that was done by Professor Roger Ulrich back in 1984. But what he did was he placed one group of patients, this was in a hospital setting, in front of brick walls, and then he placed another group of patients viewing tree landscapes. And the results were outstanding. So this was the environment. You can see there the patients' rooms and where they were looking. Now, what they found was that those that looked at the brick wall took longer to recover versus the ones that looked at nature. Also, the use of pain medication was down 22% for postoperative recovery time. And postoperative recovery time was down by 8.5%. So what he discovered here back in 1984 is that, and just proof of concept, is that when we look at nature, when we have that ability to look out into nature, what ends up happening is it actually, can help us improve our, whether we've got any, recovery issue, or we're trying to recover, or just trying to, heal. And it could be all different kinds of situations that we're in, but we've got that opportunity to really improve our health and well-being by having that opportunity to look out. Now, here's the thing. Many of you might say, well, I've got clients that don't have views to nature, but you can incorporate various bio-inspirational elements into a space. Again, it could be large format graphics on the wall. It could be photography. It could be elements of, that you bring into the space. So it doesn't always have to be a window looking out, but if you can minimize that, or you can think about that when you're renovating and designing spaces, it's certainly going to impact your clients on the in the long term. So what happens in that biophilic environment? Now, really, our human body and our mind largely, developed in an adaptive response to the natural environment. And so what happens is that we actually find that when you've got nature surrounding you, as I mentioned earlier about wood grain reducing your blood pressure by 5 beats per minute, what happens is you've got a decreases in cortisol, you've got a decrease in heart rate, you've got you're calmer, you're feeling more productive, you're feeling more engaged in that environment, you're more likely to want to engage with other people and collaborate or to connect. And so it's really important because there's so many positive attributes to having that type of biophilic environment. Now, this is just a real quick example here. It even increases your short-term memory by 14%. Those are your blood pressure, reducing the blood pressure. So you want to be able to really look at what can you do in terms of that renovation or that design of that space for that aging in place client to be able to incorporate those natural elements in here. We know that nature restores. And there was a study that was done in a publication called Mind, and MIND, and it's a journal of philosophy. And it was revealed that 90% of those that interviewed said that their moods improved after spending time exposed to nature. And they changed from being depressed and stressed and anxious to more calm and more balanced. So you can imagine that, as a senior being in an environment that doesn't offer that, it's going to contribute unconsciously to increasing a lot of stress, perhaps increasing depression and other things, so anxiety and so on. So you really want to take a serious look at how nature and having a connection to nature or having those elements and those patterns of biophilic design in our space, how they're emotionally going to affect people. So integrating nature within our space, it does not have to be plants. It could be the natural light that comes through. It could be a nature-inspired color palette. Yes, we understand that we've got to have contrast in colors, but you certainly, can add in, and don't be afraid to add in color palettes that really resonate with your clients that are perhaps more naturally inspired. I've mentioned the views of nature. You can have water features, you can have the artwork, you can have the circadian lighting systems. Again, remember how our bodies, how we, evolved out of nature. Circadian lighting is really important as in the early morning, as the sun is starting to come up, to peak at noon and then start to go down in the evening to set us and get us ready for sleep. But there are other things that you can incorporate too, and those would be fractal patterning, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Shadows, they all add interest to that space. Now, by incorporating these elements, we can create living spaces that not only look beautiful, but they also foster that deeper connection to nature, and it promotes that sense of well-being, relaxation, and harmony in our homes. So when we talk about interior design elements of biophilia, I'm going to share what we talk about in the interior design world. We're looking at more of those rounded, elements. We're looking at the curves. We're looking at natural movement of lines. We're really trying to reduce a lot of those right sharp angles, repeated patterns, organized complexity, fractals, patterns. They can all be easily incorporated into a space, sometimes not even knowing it. And just look at this picture here. Just the shadows on the wall as they change throughout the course of the day can really add an element of interest to the space. Now, a lot of designers, and I'm not sure how familiar you are, but they draw a lot of inspiration from the Nordic countries. Nordic countries really look at comfort and they look at principles within that space, and they really draw, they really look at creating spaces that prioritize the comfort and the connection and contentment, and really build upon how we emotionally feel within that space. You want to embrace that warmth and that coziness, having those soft textures, the warm lighting, the earthy tones, the layered decor, the fireplace, and I just want a side note here is that there was a recent study on the fractal patterning from fireplaces, whether it's electric or natural gas fireplaces or wood burning fireplaces. What they found is that people were more engaged. They tended to want, when they had fireplaces within their space, what happened is that they were more engaged. They were more into storytelling mode. They were more inclined to sit with family, perhaps play games, read. And what we found with that is it actually supports cognitive health. So don't discount the opportunity to be able to put in our case, it most likely would be an electric fireplace for safety reasons, but there is value in having that in there and creating that that space that's really going to resonate and allow people to gather and to connect. We all know about the impact of lighting for mood, and we know how important lighting is for the aging in place category. And the more, the brighter, the better to reduce falls. But you also have to look at how it affects the mood. So by putting in, full bright LED lights within that space, a lot of blue light, obviously it's reducing the melatonin and going to affect the quality of sleep. But light does play an important role, and the proper lighting is really important in the function of our nervous system and our endocrine systems and the secretion of hormones like melatonin. And so for those of you that might not be familiar, melatonin is released in the pineal gland, and it's about a 24-hour cycle, and it's according to how much light is received. And what it does is it regulates the body's natural circadian rhythm, so that wake-sleep cycle, which all of us need, especially if we need to get a better sleep. So having different types of lighting within the space. And I don't mean lighting that's just, decorative and task lighting and so on. You got to look at the color and the temperature of the lighting, because you don't want to have that constant bright light, that blue light in that space, because it's going to affect the quality, not just of their, affecting their sleep cycle, but also their mood. If you're constantly in a bright environment, it's going to affect your mood. It's actually going to create depression and so on. So you've got to really balance that out. Now, some of the important things, are I think one of the most important rooms in the house is really the bedroom, and creating that sleep sanctuary. And a quality of sleep is really paramount for our overall health and well-being. And we all know that it offers numerous benefits, and that it can positively impact our lives if we get good quality sleep. Now, quality sleep, as you know, it enhances our mood regulation. It fosters a positive emotional state, and it reduces the stress, or feelings of stress and anxiety and irritability, which as we age, and I've got a 98-year-old mother, and I know she can be extremely irritable. She happens to be in a retirement home. She doesn't have control over her environment there. And I know that often she says to me, oh, I couldn't sleep the whole night, or, various aspects of that space that don't allow her to sleep properly. And so it really affects not just the next day, but it can extend beyond the next day. And so that sleep is really important. And I want to encourage all of you, if you're not familiar with sleep, to look at Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep. And this quote I thought, was worth putting in here. He says, I can't think of any aspect of our biology that isn't affected by sleep. And so I want you to really pay attention as you're creating or renovating or going in for consultation with your clients for aging in place, to investigate their sleep area, because crafting a sleep sanctuary is really going to be important, and it's going to contribute to better sleep. And if your clients have better sleep, I can't imagine that they wouldn't give you carte blanche on renovating or doing their entire home, and doing more work for them, because at the end of the day, it's paramount in terms of the quality of sleep that we get. So what are some of the tips you can look at when you're creating that environment? Obviously, we want to keep it dark. We want to have really reduce those noise transitions, or transmissions, I should say. We want to improve the thermal comfort. We want to declutter and simplify the space. You want to be able to use calming colors. You want to limit electronics. You want to choose those natural shapes that we talked about earlier. We call them biomorphic shapes. So they're really those curves and those rounded soft lines. And you want to be able to select natural textures and materials. Obviously, we're going to be obvious or aware of the VOCs that we're bringing into that space. And you want to have fractal patterning. And in a few minutes, I'll tell you just quickly about fractal patterning. I'm going to rush through this because I don't want us to go over time, but what you're doing is you're really stimulating the brain through the beauty and in this case I say home decor, but home decor could be the elements of that you're putting into the renovation too, whether it's the flooring or architectural products that you're adding to the wall or difference like that. um, Really the beauty in our home does extend beyond the mere aesthetics. It really encompasses elements also that you have to take into consideration, like symmetry and harmony and the visual interests that engage the brain on a cognition or cognitive level. So I want you to know that it's really important. Any detailing that you put into a space, what you're doing is you're taking it from a bland and boring environment to something that is going to be more interesting, especially for the brain. Our brains constantly are seeking detail. It's one of the ways it exercises. It looks for detail and then pulls away. It looks for detail and then pulls away. And so think back again to our ancestors living out in nature. They were constantly surrounded by fractals, fractal patterning, and detail, partially, mostly for survival reasons. But today we don't have to worry about a lion, coming to eat us, and we don't have to worry about survival to that extent. But our brains still work on the same mechanisms or the same evolutionary inheritance that it had, and that developed over thousands of years. So you know, it also, by having detail in the environment, what happens is our brains perceive beauty as a reward. When you see beautiful environments or detailed environments, what it's doing is it's triggering a positive emotional response and promoting a sense of well-being. And so, as I mentioned, our brains are seek detail, and we are looking for that organized complexity and patterns. So again, part of the biophilic, if you download that document that I talked about earlier, you'll learn about organized complexity, and it can be something in terms of like the wallpaper that you put in. Obviously, you're not going to go to this type of extent of renovating a space, but any detailing that you're putting into that space is really going to make a difference. Now, what I think is important for you to know here too is that every second in our day, our brains take in a massive amount of information. We literally take in 11 million pieces per second, but our brains can only consciously process about 40 bits of information of those 11 million pieces per second. So our brains are constantly seeking detail, but and organized complexity. It's inherently wired into the process, our brain processing. And what it does is it allows us to make sense of the world. So I'm going to just quickly show you a couple of slides, and you're going to see just the organized complexity, give you a little bit more idea of organized complexity. Now, these are architectural buildings versus interiors. Look at the beauty, the roundness, the shape, the detailing, the organized complexity in this building. Again, this is in Florence, Italy, the organized complexity. People stand there. This is going to be on a postcard. People stand there in awe of the beauty of this, the organized complexity that we see within that space. Again, organized complexity. We look at these environments and of course, you're not going to renovate a space that's going to look like this, but I want you to know how important detailing elements can be within that space and can make a difference to that individual, whether they are part of the renovation process or they're part of the design process. Again, the organized complexity. So you won't, when you look at, and of course, we all know we're not going to design a space like this for aging in place, but this is what's happening out there. People are watching these television programs and they're thinking, I want things to be really simple and plain, but your brain has nothing to take in. There's very little for your brain to take in. Remember, 11 million bits per second our brain is taking in. And so we're constantly looking for those details within our space. Now, one of the ways you can do that is adding in fractals. Now, fractals, what are fractals? Fractals are similar patterns over a range. They can change over a range. So think of a fern leaf where you've got larger leaves and then they've got continuous pattern, but then they shrink in size. So that is basically a fractal. And our brains seek this. Our bodies, we're all actually made of fractals. If you think about it, our lungs, our circulatory systems, our brains, we are from nature. And so we do seek this coming from nature. We're constantly seeking it. And there's a connection, a pleasure that we find when we have fractals in and around our spaces. Why they're important, and I'm going to share this quote from Terrapin Bright Green. The experience of fractals are quantifiable health benefits, including reduced stress, improved cognition functioning, enhanced creativity, problem solving, heightened appreciation for nature, and a positive emotions. Fractals are the basic building blocks of nature. This is Richard Taylor. He's a professor at the University of Oregon and specializes in fractal patterning. And as I said earlier, we are nature. We've got fractals within us. We are nature. We are from nature. Now, just real quickly, there are different types of fractals out there. You're going to get exact fractals like a snowflake. You're going to get statistical fractals like a mountain ridge, tree branches, great for the views out there. We also have dynamic fractals, which would be things like the fractals that you'd see from water, waves, clouds, and those flames in the fireplace, that electric fireplace that we might have. So all of them do calm us down and have health benefits when you have fractal patterning within that. Could be the detailing you have in the crown molding or so on. Now, it's important to know too much is not good. We know this right away. I mean, a person that's aging could not stand a carpet with those high D values. But again, if it's too low, it's going to be a very bland environment. We do a lot of tracking, visual eye tracking in the United States. And I work with an organization called the HAPI, HAPI.org. And what they did was they did a survey just to show when they added fractals onto the side of a building, how people responded. And this was the results. When they added fractals onto that side of the building, more people looked at it, were more engaged with it. They were able to identify that through their biometric tracking, which is something I just recently did a couple weeks ago. More people smiled, as opposed to the picture on the left where people just looked down the street. So if I asked you what setting would you prefer, this one versus this one, I think you'll all probably agree that by having elements in there, and they don't have to be, a lot of patterning, but something as simple as that type of patterning can really change the dynamic of that space. Now, just for your own reference, I'm using this picture here to give you an idea of just, some of the subtle fractal patterning that can be put into a space. Of course, not for an aging in place, but just so you have a better understanding of the fractal patterning and where you can put it. Now, at the end of the day, what we're striving for is really happiness at home, because it really does create that healthy environment for us, whether your grandchildren or your children are coming to visit those elderly parents or so on. You want to create that environment really for everybody, and really looking at the emotional health and what you can do for people. And again, understanding that our homes are more than just physical structures. It's more than just about how we enter that home, that zero threshold, visitability, engaging or being able to access various ranges and reach. It's more than that. You've got to really prioritize and evoke those positive emotions and comfort and create that sense of connection. You're creating a living space for your clients. And so as I wrap up, I just want to quickly review. Those are some of the topics that we talked about in this. You can't cover this in just 1 hour presentation. You really have to look at this, on long term, and understand it and pay attention to it. Now that I've kind of planted that seed in you, what I want you to do is that pay attention to when you go and you do those renovations for your aging in place clients. How are they actually? It's more than, hey, this is great, I can actually now easily get into a shower and I feel safe within that shower. And that's great. That's what we're striving for. But how do they, once you're gone and your tools are packed up and everybody's gone out of that space, how does that individual feel? Are they feeling connected and happy? Did you create an environment that really helps them thrive emotionally in that space? Because at the end of the day, having that, reducing those stressors are certainly going to aid into that longevity of that individual. And again, as I said, it sets you apart. So prioritizing, again, positive emotions, comfort, sense of connection, creating that living space that really promotes relaxation, reduces stress, enhances overall happiness. We're not talking enough about that in the aging in place design. What we're talking about is how we physically move through the spaces. So I am founder of the Science and Design Academy. If you're interested, you can always email me. I'm happy to share more information with you. But that's the realm that I'm in right now. And I really feel like it closes the circle. I'm going to stop sharing. Let's see if I can stop sharing. What I want to say to you is that when I looked originally at LEED and we looked at the buildings and how they affected the environment, then I moved to aging in place. Like I said, how we move through it, the well building standards, how it affects our body systems, our lungs, our, our endocrine, all of those elements of our body. But now I'm in the final phase of how our environments emotionally affect us. And so every one of us here has that opportunity to create not just a functional space, but a space that's really going to resonate. And like I demonstrated, by looking at the emotions, you can actually have physiological positive effects or negative effects if you do it wrong. So if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. And I think we stated pretty well on time.
Yeah, no, great comments. Anyone, questions for Linda?
It's a lot to take in.
It is, and you did a great job of organization, of presenting the material, and sharing some ideas that maybe we hadn't thought of before. So that's great.
Well, I think
One,
that's, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no,
Yeah.
I just wanted to say one thing. So I have two young adult children. One who recently graduated, and we're not sure if she's going to come back home or not. And the other one is a junior in college. And so much of what you talked about as far as the home and the emotional connection there, I think really resonates with young adults and teens too. There's probably a lot of research that could be done to connect this sort of information and data with young people, young adults, and their mental health struggles that we see so often in the current generation.
RM, you're absolutely right. And that we do talk about this on a broader scale. Mental health is not for one specific age category. It's all of us, from the young to the elderly. And a lot of the elderly, do suffer from mental health, but we don't look at it. They never talked about it. We don't look at it. We don't discuss it. They often, like my mother, she wouldn't discuss any of those types of depressive challenges and situations that she has, or her mood disorders. But you know what? We as an industry need to take that responsibility and start to think about it. And the only way you can really understand it is you need to have a better understanding of human biology, of the brain, and how we process information, and what are our pain points and what are our pleasure points. We as human species, we avoid pain at all costs. So from I'm a marketing person. So what do you want to do when you're doing your marketing is you want to demonstrate and leverage how your firm, your company, your design services or your renovation services are going to reduce those pain points for people and really make them and turn them into, positive environments for them. Don't discount people's emotional health. When you're designing for aging in place. It's easy to go in and follow the CAPS training and say, you know what, do this, check this, check this, lower your light switches, put lever handles in, look at the swings of doors, creating all those things that we all know about inside out, but we don't talk about. And I wouldn't be surprised at some point down the road that this actually gets, incorporated into some of the training programs. Understanding how we
It's
emotionally feel in our spaces.
yeah. There are a lot of gaps that, until you, and when I first thought, I was like, emotions, and I'm like, wait, what? And then as you kept talking, I was like, yeah, I guess, yeah, there are lots of ways to connect that and to think differently. I mean, even like you said, we think a lot of the hardware and the physical space, but even something like, where do you put windows, or can you move the bed to a certain area to capture more of that natural light, things like that you'd be so focused on the safety aspect and mobility aspect that by the time you start to look at that, it's too late. You've already redone the space, so
Right.
it's really good. It's very helpful to think in a very different dimension.
Well, you say a good point there. We look at like, for instance, moving the furniture around so that you get the natural light, but what about the views,
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and so and as and so one of the things that you'll see in biophilic design is a term called prospect and refuge. So go back to that cave image that I showed you, with Nigel Nicholson. You can't take the Stone Age out of the man. You can take the man out of the Stone Age, but you can't take the Stone Age out of the man. Prospect and refuge, a modern day version of prospect and refuge. Think of a senior sitting at a chair looking out of their living room window while they're drinking a cup of tea or coffee, or a breakfast nook in the kitchen where you've got the refuge of your space, so the refuge of that cave, the refuge of our space, and the prospect of looking out to see what opportunities, what risks, what's coming towards us. And so that from our caveman ancestry still applies today. Why do we find those places so? I have it at home. My favorite place at home is my kitchen table that I look out into my community. I happen to have views of Lake Erie. I'm right directly across from Erie, Pennsylvania. So I have views of Lake Erie, trees, natural. There's no other place in the house, with the exception now of my bedroom upstairs, that is directly above, that has the same views. When I open the curtains, I have the same views except elevated. I love that time there. My office doesn't do that for me. I don't spend time in my office because it doesn't make me feel connected and so that prospect and refuge, something small, but really significant when you're doing spaces. So again, to your point, you want to look at that environment and look at what can you do to make them feel emotionally happier within that space.
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Thanks for your comment, Mariola and Colleen. Anyone else? Linda, you can read your comments on there.
Yep. It's lots to take in. I hope I planted a seed. Start thinking about it. What I want you to know is science has lived in this silo. Design build has lived in this silo, and never the two should cross. Now, because we're in the century of biology, all of a sudden everybody's talking about the human, and what we're seeing is neuroscientists getting hired to work for architectural firms. I just went on a tour with Ty Farrow. Oh, by the way, let me grab my book. I'm going to share one thing. Sorry, this is my office. And if you looked on this wall, I've got even more, hundreds of books on this, but I want to show this book to you. This is my next favorite book. It's called Constructing Health: How the Built Environment Enhances Your Mind and Health. Now, keep in mind, this is an architect, Ty Farrow. He happens to be Canadian, although he does work globally. He gets often asked to speak at AIA conferences. And this is my new best favorite book because he talks about salutogenic design and in hospital and school environments. Now, keep in mind, whatever we do in other buildings, whether they're hospitals, hotels, restaurants, schools, retail, they design them for human beings. But at the end of the day, those same human beings have to come home. So what can we learn from other industries? Look at the workplace and what they're doing to try to attract people to come back to work by bringing in all these elements of, reducing stress and adding nature and that. You can learn a lot from the other industries. The well building standards, even though you might not go to get your well AP, you can download it for free. And it's a resource of great information because it tells you exactly how acoustics and affect and what parts of the body it affects. And same with what Ty is doing here with his book, Constructing Health. He's teaching us how we can emotionally connect to our spaces. We're moving towards breaking the silos down between neuroscience and the scientific world and how they just talk amongst themselves in 17-syllable words with all their white papers. We're breaking that silo down, and we're breaking it down with the architect, design, build world, and we're sharing that information to improve our environments. So you all know how to design spaces for aging in place. Now you have to design them for the emotional human being that lives in that space.
Terrific. Anything else? Any other questions? Linda, great presentation. Thanks for being with us today.
Always happy to be with you guys.
If you want to get a hold of Linda, the best way to do so is
info@scienceanddesign.academy. You don't have to use the .com anymore. So it's info@scienceanddesign.academy. If you do scienceanddesignacademy.com, yes, you can reach me too. I've linked both of them together. But scienceanddesign.academy, and you'll find me. LinkedIn. I'm always on LinkedIn. I'm always posting things, and I will repost. If you post things and tag me, I will repost any of yours.
This program will be posted to LinkedIn later today too.
Yeah, and I do have my following on LinkedIn. I've worked really hard to build it, and they are mostly they're mostly architects and designers
And to that, we'll leave it at this. If you are on LinkedIn, but you're not as connected as you'd like to be, here's a good start. So all of us on the call today, that you can see our connection points. Myself, Linda, you can start with that and reach out from there, and then find commonalities.
Yeah.
So join us again next month for our program. You'll see online real soon. I'll have an announcement about that in more details. And we're going to go ahead and stop the recording now, but thanks for being with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.